Hello, and for today, I will be talking about the three core processes of client-centric consulting. Now, this topic comes after getting an understanding of what consulting and consultancy is all about. We also, by this time, have taken a look on who the consultant is, okay, and who the client is, and what are the services that can be offered for the client. Now, this is going to be a relatively short talk because we want to understand the factors, or rather the processes that really affect and influence and impact client-centric consulting. So the big idea here is that we want to take a look at these three processes. First is the consultant's engagement process. The second is the client's change process. And the third, last one, is the client's operational process. Now, if you take a look, the very first process, the consultant's engagement process, is a process that's within our control as consultants. However, it would be not appropriate, or it would really diminish our ability to perform well as consultants if we do not have an understanding on the change process of the client and its ongoing operational process or processes, okay, which we just perhaps bunch it up in operational process. Okay. Now, let's talk about the engagement process. Okay. Simply put, we can take a look at the engagement process as three stages, sequentially ordered, right? You have the propose stage, the deliver stage, and the close stage. In the propose stage, this is what we have referred to in the past as some sort of pre-sales. At this point, it's possible that you haven't really sold the idea yet to a potential client, or maybe you would have sold the engagement already, but it's possible that the details haven't been ironed out yet. Nevertheless, the whole idea of the propose stage is that this is just really the starting line. You're not yet doing anything, you're not yet delivering specifically any service to the client yet. You're exploring things, and that's really the propose stage. The second stage is what we call the deliver stage. Now, this is where the action happens. At this point, you get to execute the things that you've proposed. What you've proposed at the start, okay, then you give life to that proposal. You do it. You engage people within the organization, maybe possible vendors, you engage them, okay, and you go through it. Now, generally, in the deliver phase, this is also the realm of project management. So this is a different field altogether, project management, but nevertheless, consultants get to be involved in the project management process as a whole. Okay, they may not be the project managers themselves, but the fact that they're the ones who made the proposal, it is incumbent upon them to make sure that what will be delivered is according to plan. And lastly, after delivering everything that's proposed, okay, they close the engagement. Earlier, we've talked about the idea of trying to build on the engagement, maybe coming up with another engagement. Okay, we'll talk more about that later on when we try to maximize the engagement opportunities, okay, with a specific client. But nevertheless, your engagement process typically follows a three-stage sequential format, which is the propose stage, the deliver stage, and the close stage. Now, let's take a look at the specifics here. Okay, let's take a look at the engagement process in more detail. And if we unpack those three stages, if you may, propose, deliver, close, you'll notice that there are smaller, more discrete units that we can properly identify in each of these three stages. And what would they be, right? Uh, in the proposed stage, you have three specific steps that you will have to look into. Well, first is the find step, the second is the focus step, And the third is the frame step. So find, focus, frame. They're pretty easy to remember, the three F's. Well, find, what does find mean here? Well, find can refer to finding an opportunity, finding a problem, and it could even be finding your real client. Like you may have an organization or a company that you'd like to focus into, but okay, you probably want to really look for more, or something more relevant perhaps. And then after finding the opportunity or the problems perhaps, then you focus on it. Maybe it could be many. An organization can have so many things that they'd like to address, but you probably need to just focus on a few of them, or maybe just one of them, and then framing them. By framing, of course, we want to frame the problem itself, but then you also want to frame the scope of work that you really want to do. And then at the end of this frame step, you come up with an actual proposal. So this pretty much ends your propose stage. Now in your deliver stage, so it's easy to remember this for with three, or sorry, five C's: commence, collect, consider, create, counsel, and consult. So commence, simply put, is just to start. Go ahead, start doing what needs to be executed. Collect, this would refer to collecting the data that you might need. Okay. Consider, then you start analyzing whatever data that's already collected. Create, now you come up with a product or solution that your client would benefit. And then after coming up with that product or solution, then you counsel and consult. Okay, you try to socialize what you've created and try to see whether there needs to be some improvement, or whether they're okay with it, or they probably don't like the idea, and then you have to repeat it all together. Okay. And by this stage, assuming that everything is according to what the client would want, okay, after the counsel and consult step, well, that's already the end of your deliver stage. Now you move to the close stage, which is pretty much just closing it. Now, if you've noticed, in the bottom figure, you have feedback loops. So along the way, it's not really a sequential step wherein what we call a gated process, wherein once you move through a gate, you cannot move back. Well, that's not really possible in a consulting engagement. You have to understand that because you're dealing with clients, and as we learned earlier, that needs aren't really explicitly expressed, it's possible that the feedback that you'll be getting would need to be incorporated in your original, and then you'll come up with a revised approach on how you'd want to address your client. So nevertheless, you will see that the feedback loops really are heavy during the deliver stage, but it is possible, for some weird reason, that you may have to go back to the frame step of the propose stage. I wouldn't say it's completely rare, but this happens when you have a frame, okay, a defined scope of work that you want to do, a problem or opportunity that is rigorously defined, and all of a sudden the client would have given you some additional information that would make you believe that your earlier frame is incorrect. So you will have to change your frame. But nevertheless, much of the feedback is actually happening during the deliver stage. Okay. Now, let's talk about the client's change process. Now, ideally, the client actually has its own change process. They'd probably have a way or a culture even on how change can happen, how things develop, okay? And each and every client, each and every company would have a different way of really trying to define how change happens, or how change is accepted in that environment or in that organization. But for our purposes, we'll try to come up with a typical process, change process, which be applicable for a grand majority of organizations. So there would be 6 steps here, or six phases in the client's change process. Okay, and later on, after understanding each of the steps, each of the stages in the change process of the client, you'll then realize where one can play and and operate as a consultant. Okay, so the first step here, you'd notice just above the circle is the monitor step or the monitor stage, wherein you're doing an assessment of your competitive environment. Okay, uh, and then after you monitor the environment, okay, the client can go into the think stage. Okay, so they come up with a strategy, they come up with an approach. Okay, and then they move to the operate existing stage. So this is where they perform, measure, and identify improvements. So giving life to the strategy, to the approach that they crafted during this think step. And then once the strategy and then coming up with some sort of an approach, okay, on how you'd want to do things, then you go with what is known as the plan step, wherein you develop the changes that need to happen. Okay, of course, the premise here is that the client is already running, okay, in the sense that it has its own practices, it probably even has its own culture, its own customs, its own policies. So the plan step here is really trying to come up with an idea on how you can introduce necessary changes in order for the strategy to work that you've devised or the client devised during the think stage. Okay, and then once you've come up with your change plans, then you implement the change. Okay, you deliver the improvements, and then you operate according to what is known as the operate improve stage. Okay, so you perform, you measure, and you confirm the result. Okay, and by then you're hopeful that the changes that you really wanted to implement were really successful. Okay, so these are the normal 6 steps. And generally, the client would be heavy on maybe the first three, so the monitoring, the thinking, and the existing operations. Right? Um, and depending on the nature, the culture of the organization, okay, change can be spotty, change can be very frequent. That can also be a function of the industry. Like if you'd expect the industry to be rapidly evolving, like in the case of IT, then you would expect that the operate existing stage would be a short period, because then you will have to engage in a change initiative, okay, wherein the operate improved will eventually become the operate existing step, okay, later on. Now, how does this relate to a consulting engagement? Okay, naturally, all consulting engagements should result in a change within a client. It's a little bit weird or antithetical or anti-thematic to consider getting the services of a client if you don't want to have any change. At the very least, you'd want to have some sort of a change of mind. It may be internal to you, to the client. It may not manifest itself in an external change in the company, but at the very least, there should be a change. Whether it's just internal to the person, maybe some new information, new ideas, or it can actually, more often than not, result in an actual change in how things are done in an organization. So you should tailor your work most appropriately to the client's underlying change agenda. What it is that they're really eager to do or to happen. And then that would ensure that the likelihood of success actually increases. Now, where are the opportunities in the change process for the consultant? Okay, one type of engagement, okay, which is listed here as engagement one, is there is an opportunity for the consultant to develop strategy. They can propose the strategy on behalf of the client. They can co-own the strategy with the client. It's possible that the client will need the services of the consultant in order to jointly craft a strategy for the organization. Or in this stage, the consultant can just simply like a good sounding board. Maybe the client has some ideas on how to develop the strategy, and the job of the consultant is really something like a vetting or an audit type of function. The second opportunity where an engagement with a consultant would be useful would be reviewing the current operations of the client. So an operational review. Okay, so that's where they'll be involved in. Third opportunity would be in relation to managing the actual change. So if a change is already being implemented now, the consultant can be there to see how the change will be managed. Okay? So there will be people who might be involved in making sure that the change is adopted quickly, as seamlessly as possible, with minimal amount of expenses or effort. Okay? Or they can be the ones who will try to execute this change. Okay? Nevertheless, this is an area wherein the consultant can be involved in the client's change process. And lastly, a consultant can be engaged in a post-implementation review. Okay, or it's possible that after a change has been implemented, in the case of service management, you would be involved in some sort of outsourcing service. So you outsource whatever things that would be needed to be executed after the change. So for example, if you implement a system and you expect that there's going to be some maintenance required, it's possible that your consultant will just come in to do the maintenance part. Okay? So for that piece, you're practically outsourcing the, the maintenance work, okay, after the change has been effected. Now, the last core process that we will discuss is the client's operational process. So this is pretty much the day-to-day activities of the client. Okay? But as we know, consulting engagements have various impacts, okay, on the operations of a business in a number of ways. I mean, like I said, I mean, all engagements in consulting, they will result in something that will change the client. Okay? And the impact can be assessed in various ways. Well, number one, the way staff time and other resources are used. Ideally, you'd probably use less and less of them, so you're becoming more efficient. Okay, that's an expectation, the usual expectation. Another way is that the consultants of the business, okay, how their presence alone sometimes can really affect how people think, how people operate, how people plan. Okay, and of course, I mean, the risk of collateral damage and unintended outcomes. It's possible that clients sometimes they act as some sort of an insurance, right? So if a client didn't have the services of a consultant, it's possible that the client may have undertaken some wrong decisions that would be costly for the organization. So at least you've been able to avoid that. However, on the flip side, you do have the risk of the consultant probably making it worse than before, right? And that's going to be very difficult to plan out if you don't really have a good understanding of how the presence of a consultant really impacts the overall operational process of the client. Now, this is the last portion, and we're talking about maximizing consulting opportunities. So once you're done with everything in terms of your consulting, right? You've completed your engagement process, you're ready at the close stage. It would be a little bit a waste, right? It's a waste of opportunity. I couldn't find a better phrase, right? If you're not able going to stretch your engagement with that particular client, assuming that the client can still afford to pay more, right? So what are ways of maximizing consulting opportunities? Well, there are three types. Okay, the first type is an on-sell. If you take a look at the diagram for on-sell, which is the leftmost diagram, you'd notice that it's the same framework as the client's change process. So by on-sell, what we mean in on-sell is that we try to move along the change process of the client. So if we've been doing consulting work, for example, during the think step of the client's change process, which is probably strategic consulting, then you will understand that it's possible that they may need some help in doing some sort of audit or review of their current business. So instead of just simply providing consulting for strategy development, you could also provide consulting for an operational review. So that's possible. And you call that onsen. Okay. Now, another type of maximizing your consulting opportunities with a specific client is what is known as a cross sell. So, cross sell would be you have a particular consulting service, okay, that's already delivered to a client, but the client would have expressed a different type of need that is not addressed by the current consulting service, but a completely different service. Okay, same client, okay, in a way, same consultant or the same consulting company, but different service. You call that cross selling or a cross sell. Now, the last way to maximize your consulting opportunity is what is known as an upsell. Okay, and this would refer to the same client, and perhaps it could mean the same consulting service that you have, but you're moving across a different area within the organization of the client. So perhaps you've been doing a particular consulting service in Department 1, you would probably do the same consulting service in another organization within the same company, let's say Department 2. You call that upselling. And for that, you don't really have to change your skill sets required. Okay? You're just probably moving the location of where you do that same service, but it's still within the same organization. Now, typically, upselling is quite possible in very large organizations, okay? But more often than not, you'd probably see a lot of on-selling and cross-selling with the same client. Okay? If you really want to squeeze as much opportunity as you can within that client. Okay. And with that, this is where we end our quick talk or lecture on the three core processes of client-centric consulting. If you have any questions, do drop me a note, and I hope to respond to you very quickly. With that, thank you for listening, and see you around. Okay, bye.